Well, did that make your day? That's an example of, when we think of bad, those are the kinds of things we think about. And that was just an example from a couple of years ago of the bad things that were happening in our world. We look at that and we think, how horrible is that? How awful is that? Is there a possibility that there could be anything good come from something so bad? Now, we, though, on the other hand, sitting right here, probably cannot relate to that. We've never been a part of something like that. We're not in a place where those kinds of things normally happen in that kind of a way. And so it's hard for us to somehow connect to those kinds of bad things. But I submit to you that you probably have some bad things in your own life that to you feel like that. Perhaps it's some kind of physical burden that's in your body, something that you're dealing with physically. Perhaps it's something in a relationship. Perhaps it's in your family or your friends or whoever it might be. Or perhaps it's a financial bad. And to you, you lay awake at night like it's that. That's how bad it is for you. And you may wonder sometimes, well, this is so awful. Is there any redeeming value to this whatsoever? Is there any possibility that good could come from this bad? The question is, can God bring good from that kind of bad? Can God be trusted to do that? And if you read through the Bible, you'll find people in the Bible who actually did trust God to bring good out of the bad. So the question is, if they could do it, what's the quality that these people possessed? Or what is the quality about God that enables those people to trust Him like that in those bad situations? In the passage that Matt read, we're not going to read it again, but there in that passage, I believe that it describes a quality of God that He possesses that is something that enables us to trust Him to bring the good out of the bad. And the quality is this. It's called sovereignty. What does that mean? To be sovereign means to be supreme, unlimited, totally independent of any other influence. It means that God is totally in control of everything that happens. And what's amazing in this psalm is that the supreme being of the universe, the one who created everything, does not relate to people from a distance or as a crowd, but He relates to them one by one on an intimate basis. Listen to how His knowledge of God's people is described in that psalm that Pastor Matt read. It says that He knows when they sit or when they stand, when they lie down, when they go out. He knows what they think and say before they even say it. And God is always with them. There is no place that they can go that God is not already there. Even darkness cannot hide God from His people or His people from God, because God cuts through darkness like it is light. God knows His people because He made them. He saw them before they were born, and He ordained every day of their lives before one of them came to be, and God thinks about them all the time. He's sovereign. He knows us intimately. Everything. All that we're going through, the good and the bad. And He's in total, absolute, undeniable control of everything, even the bad. Peter describes this concept as he's describing the execution, the death, and the death of Jesus Christ. And he says this in the book of Acts: this man was handed over to you by God's set purpose and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put Him to death by nailing Him to the cross. Peter says that when Jesus died, it wasn't as if God had a bad day. He didn't have a day off. He wasn't looking in a different direction. He wasn't preoccupied with something else. He was in control the entire time, and he allowed the bad to happen so that a greater good, the salvation of the world, could take place. Author John Piper writes, "People lift their hand to rebel against the Most High God, only to find that their rebellion is unwitting service in His wonderful designs. Even sin cannot frustrate the purposes of the Almighty." Even when those sinful, horrible, painful things happen, the Bible says, God says, I'm still in control. I'm working them out and working them out for good purposes. And because of that, you can do one thing, and it's this: you can trust me. You may have read the account of the missionaries who went down to Ecuador to minister to the Auca Indians, and these natives, they killed them. And one of them had a wife whose name was Elizabeth Elliot, and she wrote these words: "The Auca story has pointed to one thing: God is God. If He is God, He is worthy of my worship and my service. I will find rest nowhere but in His will, and that will is infinitely beyond my largest notions of what He's up to. He's at work continuously, mysteriously, accomplishing His eternal purposes in us, through us, and in spite of us. Cause and effect are in God's hands. Is it not the part of faith, then, simply to let them rest there, because God is God?" In the Bible, David was a man who suffered at the hands of evil people. And you read through the Psalms and you read through descriptions of what happened in David's life, and he was constantly on the run, and people were out to get him, and he was hiding, and he was persecuted, and he was hurting all the time. And yet you would think that man who looked around and saw these evil men who were able to get away with stuff, you can imagine that he might wonder, God, why are you letting this happen? Why are you letting these bad guys get away with this stuff? Why aren't you doing something about it? And yet, even in the midst of that, David knew something about God and His ways, in that God always would bring the good out of the bad, and that there was some redeeming value that was going on here that God knew that David didn't, and so he was able to trust God despite all the bad things that were going on around him and to him that seemed to point to the contrary. So in Psalm 37 he writes, "Do not fret because of evil men, or be envious of those who do wrong, for like the grass they will soon wither, like green plants they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good, dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do this. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the bright noonday sun." His point is, the time of evil is limited, and those who are righteous will be vindicated. Those who seek to elevate themselves will be brought down. God is sovereign. But what about the things that happen that aren't, somebody evil didn't do them to us? What about the stuff that just happens, like the video that we saw? It just happens. But it happens to us. Nothing is a surprise to God. Nothing is a setback to His plans. Nothing can thwart God's purposes. Nothing is beyond God's control. God's sovereignty is absolute, and if He were not sovereign, He would not be God. The Bible's clear that God is in control of everything that happens. I think of Moses. Moses was a great man of God, and yet he had a disability. He couldn't speak well, and yet God gave him the ability. God used him from that bad to show His glory, to do a greater good. God does not delight in our afflictions. And yet, when they are in His will for us, He delights in working everything out for our good and for His glory, whether He removes the affliction or not. And here's your favorite verse, Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. So if examining the sovereignty of God does nothing else, it teaches us that real satisfaction in life does not come from understanding God's motives, but from understanding God's character. In trusting in His promises and leaning on and resting in the sovereign God who knows all things and does all things well. And because of that, we can trust Him to bring the good from the bad.